Okay, so today we're doing something a bit different. We're going to tell some stories based on accounts shared with us. These are stories about field trips that took some really unexpected and pretty unsettling turns. Thank you, by the way, for sharing these. They're compelling and really make you think.
Yeah, they do. Field trips, you usually think of them as structured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Supervised,
Yeah.
pretty predictable.
Exactly. Meant for learning, maybe some fun. But these accounts, they show moments where that sense of control just vanished and the unexpected, sometimes the dangerous, took over.
Right. You expect maybe, chaperone schedules, maybe being a bit bored sometimes, but not genuine fear or things you can't explain.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 3 really distinct accounts here. Each one paints a picture of a day that started out totally normal and then shifted into something else entirely.
And we'll look at the details in these stories, the moments where things changed, the choices people made, and the impact that lasted. It tells you a lot about vulnerability, maybe, and the hidden things in places we think are safe. Yeah. These stories, they take us to an aquarium, to historical sites on a ghost tour, and even an abandoned building out in the woods.
Quite a range.
So let's get into what happened to these students when their planned trips went seriously off the rails.
It's really about how quickly that feeling of safety can just evaporate.
Okay, let's start with the first one. This is about a 7th grade trip, end of the year, to Ripley's Aquarium in Gatlinburg, Tennessee.
Gatlinburg, yeah. Mountain town, hills, woods nearby, even in the touristy parts. That geography might play a role as a layer of potential isolation, maybe.
Good point. So the chaperone for this group was their science teacher, a Mr. Russo. He's described as very lax, chill, not strict like other teachers.
Which can be fine, but
Right. In this case, it meant the narrator and their friend Aiden, they pretty easily just slipped away from the main group in the lobby. They didn't want to wait around.
that's common enough with kids that age, wanting to explore. But it immediately puts them outside the supervised structure. More vulnerable.
And the aquarium was apparently pretty empty, mostly just their school groups, so they had the run of the place, almost.
Okay.
They're exploring, end up in a dark room, the kind with the glowing tropical fish tanks, clownfish, dory fish, that kind of thing.
Standard aquarium setup.
Then this man calls out to them. He's wearing cargo shorts, a green t-shirt, and the account really emphasizes his voice was very assertive, commanding.
That tone. It's not casual, it's a command right from the start. That's the first red flag. Not just a friendly, hey kids.
Exactly. He asks if they're with the field trip. Aiden says, yeah, and the man immediately says, come with me right now.
And they assumed he worked there.
Yeah, they assumed he worked there. I mean, he's acting like he's in charge in the aquarium, so
Yeah.
they follow him.
Which is completely understandable for 7th graders. You're taught to listen to adults, especially in places like that. But it's how predators can exploit that trust.
But he doesn't lead them back towards the main exhibits or the lobby. She takes them down these narrow, dark hallways, past bathrooms, past exit signs.
Okay. Getting weird now.
They end up at a back exit door, leads outside to sort of a back area near the woods. The narrator finally asks him, do you work here? Where are we going?
Good question.
He says yes, he works there, and claims he needs to drive them around to the front entrance so they can get back in properly.
Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense logically. Why drive?
Right. The narrator even noted that seemed off, but they were worried about getting in trouble for ditching the group. So they get into the back of his car, willingly.
Wow. Fear of getting yelled at versus this stranger danger situation.
He tells them to buckle up, pulls out of the back lot, and here's where it's really terrifying. He's supposed to turn right, towards the front entrance.
But he doesn't.
He turns left. Immediately, they both ask, where are you going? He doesn't answer.
Yeah.
Then, 5 seconds later, click. The sound of the back door's locking.
Oh man. That sound. That's the moment. That's when you know you're trapped. It goes from confusing and maybe sketchy to outright threatening instantly.
And then he says it. The threat. The account states it clearly. If either of you try to make any moves, I'll kill you.
Explicit threat. No ambiguity left.
Then he pulls out what looked like a big knife from his glove box, shows it to them.
Displaying the weapon. Okay? That cements the threat, makes it terrifyingly real. Any doubt about his intentions is gone now.
He drives them uphill through this woodsy, isolated neighborhood, pulls over on the side of the road. The description is just middle of nowhere, no houses in sight, no traffic.
Deliberate isolation. Minimizing any chance of help or escape.
Yeah.
Textbook predatory move.
He gets out, still holding the knife, tells them to stay put in the car.
Right.
The narrator whispers to Aiden, Be ready to run." Then the man opens the narrator's door, tells him to get out, and then he gives this chilling message for Aiden, still in the car.
What was it?
He tells the narrator to tell Aiden, if he wants me alive, he better be in the car by the time we got back.
Ugh, psychological manipulation. Trying to separate them, control one using the other, and the implication of what he planned to do. Walking him towards the woods.
Yeah. The narrator describes this awful feeling in his stomach as the man starts walking him towards the woods. But he sees Aiden sliding over to his side of the car. The door must have been unlocked on that side.
Smart kid, looking for an out.
When Aiden looks ready, the narrator just screams, "Run!" Aiden bolts downhill. The narrator dodges the man, runs after Aiden.
Incredible. Quick thinking, pure adrenaline, seizing that tiny window of opportunity.
The man chases them, on foot. And then he throws the knife at the narrator.
He threw it.
Threw it. Missed by just a few inches, apparently. They heard it clang on the ground behind them.
Wow. That's desperate and incredibly dangerous. The sound of it hitting the ground just makes it so real. How close they came.
After he threw the knife, he stopped chasing. The narrator thinks he probably just got back in his car and took off.
Maybe he realized he'd lost them. Or maybe throwing the knife was his last resort.
They just kept running. Downhill, back the way they came. Somehow they get back to the aquarium. Took them less than an hour. And they managed to sneak back into their group.
And the teacher, Mr. Russo.
Didn't even notice they were gone. The account says he didn't even notice.
That is astonishing.
Yeah.
And really concerning. That lack of awareness basically enabled this whole thing to happen and go unreported right away.
They decided not to tell anyone. They figured, what are the chances they'd catch the guy? And they just get themselves in trouble for wandering off.
A difficult position for kids to be in.
The account ends saying, as they got older, they obviously thought more about what his intentions were. They mention a few likely ones, but they still don't like to dwell on it, understandably.
It's just such a stark example of how a seemingly small lapse, the relaxed supervision, can spiral into a life-threatening situation. The whole progression, the commanding tone, the weird route, the locked doors, the threat, the knife, the isolation, the chase. It's a chilling sequence. And it really shows the trauma that carries, those unanswered questions, that deep unease that stays with you.
Absolutely harrowing. And it really drives home how quickly things can flip when you step just slightly off that expected path.
Precisely. And, the next account is completely different what happened. But it also touches on that theme, the unexpected emerging where you least expect it.
Right, this one takes us to Washington, D.C., an 8th grade field trip. Lots of historical sites, museums, monuments.
And our D.C. trip.
Yeah, so after a weekend of educational stuff, the teachers arranged a kind of treat one evening, a colonial ghost tour.
Ah, the ghost tour.
Yeah.
Usually more about spooky stories and atmosphere than actual ghosts, right? Entertainment.
That was the expectation. It was a walking tour, historical areas near old cemeteries, old townhomes. The guide even mentioned a lot of the empty homes were just preserved for historical reasons.
Setting the scene.
The narrator writing this admits they're actually scared of ghosts, but was totally sure nothing supernatural would really happen. They were split into small groups, like 10 people. They could bring cameras, but the guides basically said, don't expect much. Don't expect to capture anything real.
Managing expectations, mostly history, maybe some spooky ambiance.
So they're walking around. The narrator's mostly interested in the historical stories the guides are telling about the people who used to live in these places. Friends are taking pictures, hoping for those, shiny orbs.
Classic ghost hunt move.
But the narrator's friend, Jessica, who was also their roommate on the trip, she wasn't just snapping pictures constantly. She was really listening to the stories.
Engaged with the history. That becomes important.
So the group stops at this one house, small 2-story place. The account describes it having an ominous blue hue to the windows, but it was definitely vacant. The narrator says they felt very curious about this specific house.
Interesting detail, that blue hue. And the narrator feeling drawn to it even before hearing the story sets it apart.
Then the guy tells the history. Belonged to a man who absolutely adored his beautiful wife. They were thrilled, expecting their first child.
Okay.
But tragically, the wife died shortly after giving birth to a baby girl. The man was devastated. And the account says, as the daughter grew up, he grew to resent his homely daughter.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. He kept her inside most of the time, told her how homely she looked, apparently couldn't find anyone to marry her. He decided her only value was in her hands, so he had her learn sewing and weaving, kept her working upstairs, using her only good attribute, her hands.
What a terribly sad story. So much unhappiness in that house.
The narrator really felt for the girl, imagining them living out their lives so miserably there.
Yeah, it adds this heavy emotional weight to the place.
So after hearing that story, Jessica takes a photo of the house with her digital camera. They start walking away, moving on to the next spot. But then Jessica just stops, silent, staring down at her camera screen.
Uh-oh, that sudden stop, the silence. That's usually when something interesting happens in these stories. Shifts the mood right back to the present.
The narrator walks over, looks at the screen, sees a gleam coming from the edge of the second floor window on the right. Jessica zooms in on it.
Okay.
And what they saw, according to the account, was clear. 3 figures staring out from the window.
3 figures. Wow. Okay, so the ghost tour might be delivering more than atmosphere. A visual anomaly right in the window of that house with that story.
They described what they saw. Far right, there was a translucent outline of a woman, maybe the wife. Behind her, a taller man.
Okay, maybe the father and daughter from the story.
That's what they thought too, maybe. But then, even more curiously, there was a third figure. Also looked like a woman, but harder to make out. Her body was visible, but her skin was not as clear.
A third figure. Now that is intriguing, because the story they just heard was about the father, the wife who died, and the daughter, who's the third person. That doesn't immediately fit the narrative they were given.
Right. The narrator and Jessica totally freaked out. The first two, okay, maybe you could link them to the story, but the third one, it was a mystery.
Yeah.
So the narrator, thinking about this, actually raises their hand and asks the guide, did anyone else ever live with that family in that house?
Good question. Directly connecting the photo back to the history.
The guide apparently looked surprised. Had this sort of unanswered question look on her face, the narrator said. But she confirmed yes. During the time of their residence, they had a black female servant living with them.
Wow. There it is. The guide's confirmation provides a potential identity for that third, unexplained figure in the photo. It adds this whole other layer to the tragedy of the house, the story of the servant who lived and likely suffered there too.
Exactly.
So the photo suddenly transforms. It really does. It highlights that history includes everyone who was there, not just the main players in the usual narrative. And sometimes, maybe, unexpected things can bring those less told stories to light.
Okay. Our last account takes us somewhere completely different. Senior year of high school. Forensics class field trip.
Forensics. Okay, interesting context.
The teacher, Mr. Stevenson, takes them to an abandoned building, deep in the woods, described as the site of a major crime scene and also known to have been a drug den.
Whoa. Okay, that's not your typical field trip destination. An abandoned building with that kind of history isolated in the woods. That sounds inherently risky.
Yeah, the narrator emphasizes how tall and frightening the building looked, and its location was surreal. Just surrounded by forest, down this road that was barely used, grass growing up through it.
Setting a very ominous scene.
And the teacher, Mr. Stevenson, again with the teacher, described as so laxed. He gave them a tour like he knew the place, mentioned its unknown original purpose, how the upper floors were unfinished. But the narrator felt he either didn't even notice when students wandered off, or perhaps didn't care.
There's that theme again. Lax supervision in a clearly high-risk environment. That's concerning.
So the narrator and their friend Gianna G decide to explore on their own, go check out the upper floors. Building had maybe 8 floors, top ones looked unfinished. The narrator admits they basically forced G to come along.
Uh-oh. Venturing off into the most dangerous unknown parts of the building, away from the already loosely supervised group.
As they go up, things get weird. Less debris and graffiti on the middle floors, but then more of it higher up again.
Strange pattern.
The second highest floor is described as really sketchy. Just rotting wood foundation, lots of holes, no actual stairs to the very top floor, but they figured there had to be a way up there. They're stepping really carefully.
So the building itself is physically dangerous at this point. Falling hazards, instability. Plus the unsettling signs of who knows what activity.
Then Gianna grabs the narrator's shoulder, stops him, points up at a hole in the ceiling, says she saw something.
Yeah.
Then they hear this noise, a ticking noise, like someone calling a cat.
Weird.
And then an arm comes down through the hole. Just an arm, positioned like someone's lying flat up there. Long black sleeve, only the hand visible.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah.
Visual confirmation of someone hiding above them, plus that strange ticking sound. A deliberate attempt to get their attention, but concealed. That's unnerving.
Gianna's scared. The narrator admits they were unnerved too, even after like a nervous laugh. Gianna says, let's go back down.
Smart move.
But the narrator, maybe out of curiosity or shock, calls up, how do we get up there?
I'll do that.
The person doesn't answer, just keeps making the ticking sound, waving them up with their hand, beckoning them. The narrator says this is when it got really creepy. They finally agree, okay, let's go down.
That refusal to speak, just the persistent beckoning and that weird sound, yeah, that elevates the creep factor significantly. It feels less like a prank and more like something else. Menacing.
So right after they agree to leave, the arm pulls back up. They hear a shoe scrape on the wood above, like the person's getting up. They still can't see them.
Okay, the hidden threat is now mobile.
But as they're turning to leave the main room, heading for the stairs, there's a loud crash far behind us.
Behind them, not from above.
Behind them on the same floor, they turn around and see a man. Opposite side of the room, facing the wall initially. The account says it seemed he just jumped through one of the holes in the floor from above.
Jump through a hole. Okay, that's sudden and bizarre.
He quickly turns his head to look at them, but without moving his body, just snaps his head around.
That description is unsettling in itself. Unnatural.
And his appearance. The narrator says something about his face and clothing. He didn't look like some kid exploring. He looked dangerous and unstable.
So, a clearly visible threat now. Distinct from the ticking person upstairs, maybe? Or maybe not. Either way, this guy looks bad news.
They immediately ran for it. Down the stairs. 3 flights down, the narrator looks back up the long stairwell corridor and sees the man at top looking down at them.
Oh no, he's following.
Narrator yells, "Go to Gianna!" They keep running. Maybe 5 flights further down, narrator looks up again. The man is much closer. That's when the narrator realized, yeah, he's actively chasing us.
The fear of the unknown person is now replaced by the very real terror of being pursued by this dangerous-looking guy. In this huge, decaying, isolated building, it's turned into a chase scene.
They finally make it to the bottom floor. Narrator looks up one last time, doesn't see him. Then they hear Mr. Stevenson's voice nearby.
Safety, relatively speaking.
And the narrator says they just started to laugh, probably sheer relief and adrenaline dump. But Gianna was genuinely disturbed, still terrified.
Totally understandable reactions. That nervous laughter after intense fear, contrasted with someone still processing the shock and danger. They got out, but the experience lingers.
They find Mr. Stevenson. He asks where they've been. They tell him the truth about what just happened.
How did he react?
He was pretty mad, apparently, but also, hearing their story, he immediately advised they all leave the building. The other kids who'd wandered off had also made it back by then. He did a head count on the bus like 3 times.
Well, at least he took the threat seriously once he knew. But wow.
The narrator wraps it up saying, for the other kids, maybe the trip wasn't a total loss. They learned whatever they were supposed to about the building. But for him and Gianna, it was the most horrific thing we ever went through.
And you can see why. It perfectly illustrates the dangers of these abandoned spaces, especially with lax supervision. Multiple potential threats, the person upstairs, the man who chased them, the physically dangerous environment, the isolation, the terror of being pursued. It's so far removed from anything educational. It really highlights the psychological impact of that kind of fear and how easily things can go wrong without proper oversight.
Yeah. These 3 stories, they're so different. Aquarium, ghost tour, abandoned building. But they definitely share some common threads, don't they?
They really do. They're more than just scary anecdotes. They give you this insight into how that line between what's normal and expected and what's genuinely unsettling or dangerous can be crossed so easily, especially on trips we assume are safe.
Right. They really spotlight vulnerability, particularly for young people, right? When supervision is lacking or when the place itself isn't what it seems.
Exactly. That assumed safety net just isn't always there.
And there's that chilling idea running through them that hidden things are right there, like a person waiting or figures in a photo that shouldn't be there or people lurking where they absolutely shouldn't be. Things just below the surface that can suddenly emerge.
And maybe that's why these accounts hit home for so many people. Field trips are almost universal.
Yeah.
Everyone's been on one. They're built on this idea of a controlled, safe learning environment.
Yeah.
So when that assumption gets shattered by real danger or something completely inexplicable, it forces you to kind of recalibrate your sense of safety and risk, even in familiar seeming situations.
Hearing these accounts, you really do start thinking about those unknowns, even in places we walk past every day. What hidden histories are there? Who or what might be there that we just don't see or consider?
Absolutely. These stories are powerful reminders that our sense of security often hangs on assumptions about places, about people, and how fast that can change if you step off the path, even a little. or if something unexpected comes out of the shadows.
So, we've heard these really chilling stories today. The aquarium abduction attempt, the ghostly photo that connected to a hidden history, the terrifying chase in that abandoned building. It leaves you with a lot to think about.
It does. Maybe consider how much of our everyday comfort relies on assuming things are safe. What might be hidden, what dangers or histories exist just out of sight in places we think we know.
Thank you again for sharing these accounts with us, and thank you all for listening today.
We hope exploring these stories has given you something to reflect on.
And if you found these stories compelling, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Horror Docs channel over on YouTube.
Until next time.